Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this event of the International Federation for Public History Explorers. I'm your host, Jimena Perry, and today we are in for a treat. We are very pleased to have with us the team of the project TOPHI, the ownership of public history in India, who will tell us about their work and take some questions from the audience. But first, let me introduce them. They are Aparna Vaidik. I hope I'm saying your last name okay. She's a historian of South Asia, author of several books and recipient of many international prizes and fellowships. Aparna is involved in various public history projects. These include membership of the Mili Consortium, a group of individuals and communities interested in nurturing and protecting archives, working as a consultant on a project run by the Delhi Art Gallery for curating a public exhibition at the New Delhi's Red Fort March of Freedom, and serving as an expert for historical ethnography for Agra Lahore Heritage Project of the American Institute of Indian Studies. Currently, she is a professor of history at Ashoka University. Then we have with us Faisal, Rehman, and Ranjani Prasad, who are community archivists in the People and Nature Collective at the Keystone Foundation, which mission is to enhance the quality of life and the environment of indigenous people and local communities in India. By working on issues of natural resource and rural development, they address the challenges of conservation, livelihoods, and enterprise development through appropriate knowledge and action, technology, socioeconomic innovations, and institutions. Then we have with us Shalini Sharma. She is a PhD from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS. She joined Keele University in 2005, where she currently teaches history. In 2016, she was appointed the Director of Postgraduate Thought Studies for the School of Humanities, and in 2019, she was appointed Director of Postgraduate Studies for the School of Humanities. In 2021, Shalini became Faculty of Humanities and Social Science Lead in Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion. Then we have with us Maya Dodd. Maya received her PhD in Literary and Cultural Studies from Stanford University and subsequent postdoctoral fellowships at the Committee of South Asian Studies at Princeton University, US, and at the Center for Law and Governance in India. Recently, thanks to a new opening for contemporary engagement with archives and digital tools, she's exploring new practices via digital humanities to bringing new questions in imagining cultural studies in India, especially in terms of public history. She has been associated with digital humanities in India, and her current research is focused on questions of the digital in India. She is Associate Professor of the Department of Humanities and Languages at Flame University since 2007. And after this brief introduction, I give you the floor. Welcome and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Jimena, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk a bit about our project. As Jimena said, there are 5 people in our project, TOPHI, and you are going to be hearing from all 5 of us today. I'll just give you a sort of quick rundown of the order. So firstly, I'm going to be talking about some of the reasons why we initiated this project in the first place. Then we'll have Ranjani and Faisal who will be talking about their work as community archivists in the project. We'll then go on to Aparna, who is going to give us a bit of a personal take on how she has changed as a historian as a result of some of the discussions that we've been having as a team and her involvement in the project. And we'll finish with Maya, who's going to be talking about what we see as the future of TOPHI, particularly in relation with her expertise in the field of digital humanities and public history in India. So I'm going to start. I think I'm the only one of the team who's not going to be sharing any visuals with you, and I'm just going to be talking. Please bear with me. Okay, so TOPHI stands for the ownership of public history in India. While we as a group do not claim to represent India, I think we were initially drawn together by a commitment to engage with and understand what was meant by public history in the Indian context, and how these practices contrasted with the teaching and learning and praxis of public history in other parts of the world, from state-sponsored curations of national memory to the means of acquiring land rights for indigenous peoples, for example. And the latter I'm referring to initiatives that have been coming up in Australia. Certainly, anyone reading Indian history is well versed on the importance and the challenges of representing or giving voice to underprivileged and marginal people, thanks in the main to the work of the Subaltern School of Indian History in the 1980s and 1990s. While we do not claim to have squared that particular circle, our project seeks to face rather than avoid the question of how marginal communities, publics, understand and discuss history. As a team, we came together as researchers of archival practice and history educators to respond to the Global Challenges Research Fund call by the British Academy. The global challenge that drew us in, SDG 4, centres around education to help provide a quality and inclusive education. For us, this didn't simply mean primary level schooling of the R's, but an understanding of what is left out of public history in universities and national commemoration, and what that exclusion does to the life chances of the excluded, and how such exclusions can be addressed. In an era when statues are being torn down and textbooks rewritten, we felt it important to learn about, engage with, and intervene in the practice of public history in India. We all have our own journey towards this project. For my own part, as a British citizen of South Asian heritage, I am alarmingly aware of my minority status in the midst of culture warriors who decry any critique of empire or apologies for colonial massacres as woke or demeaning to the national pride of the UK. At the same time, the movement to address these concerns and decolonize curriculums, museum curation, and public commemoration was itself adopted by Indian culture warriors in ways that threaten to obliterate and exclude minority rights, practices, and culture in India. One stark example of this is the fact that while the British government continues to refuse to apologise for the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a historic event which led to hundreds of unarmed Indians being killed in April 1919, its recent commemoration in India through a sound and light entertainment show has led to accusations of the Disneyfication and of the event and historical inaccuracy and neglect. Public history, its creation and ownership matters. Now, rather than produce an abstract account of what needed to change in Indian universities around history education, we, perhaps naively, felt that we could learn the different ways in which different groups see, use, and archive history, and bring those understandings into Indian universities to, if you like, provide alternative syllabi and educate the educators of public history. Through their work in the People and Nature Collective at Keystone, Ranjani and Faisal had already established relationships of trust and friendship with members of many indigenous communities in the Nilgiris region of Tamil Nadu. And therefore, TOPHI was based on the historical understandings of these groups. This was not to add to the literature of Nilgiriology that has rendered particular constructions of tribal peoples over the years, nor, as I said, was it to represent India as a whole, but rather to ask the question of how different epistemologies of history could be included in and even could transform practices of history and public history in Indian educational institutions. We listed, when we put our proposal together, we listed 4 main objectives in our grant proposal, which I'll turn to now. And I do this, it's sort of actually to the group, it's like a reminder to ourselves, because although I think we all feel that we've come a long way and we've changed our project a lot from what we'd initially set out to do, we are in a way also still sticking to that original brief. So our first objective was to develop a comprehensive account of community knowledge production, from in the recent past, so from the 1990s onwards, and we thought we'd build a database of community-based public history practice. We'd facilitate innovative methods of knowledge production, and we would develop resources and some form of interactive resources, an archival website, and help develop digital and physical exhibitions so that we could interact with teachers and students in the regional context and in local languages. Our second objective was to build new capacity, so to mentor community research fellows and to encourage community research, community media reporters as well. And we wanted to also bring together history educators, students, archivists, researchers, and indigenous, and many others, community elders as well, in dialogue about creating pedagogy tools. Thirdly, we wanted to create a network of public history educators in India by encouraging this sort of a discussion and by ensuring that these networks could meet physically through workshops and project group meetings, something obviously COVID has put paid to somewhat, but also virtually as well. And lastly, we wanted simply to contribute to the archival practice and scholarship activism and policy debates about history education in a multilingual and multi-ethnic state by disseminating academic outputs, by creating a public history syllabus, by adding vernacular languages to the public history curriculum conversation, etc. So it's probably that last objective that has changed the most for us. From the questions, we've been engaging with questions by community researchers on the place of writing, for example, or written history, we've created right at the beginning of our project, we created an autoethnography document where each one of us can put down their thoughts on the progress and limitations of the project, so that we're constantly aware of, the hurdles that come up in this sort of project, as well as, we've also junked fundamentally this idea of providing a singular syllabus that can somehow address all of these problems and issues in higher education institutions, and decided to go for more adaptable lesson plans and a set of ethical recommendations on how to encourage and facilitate community history creation. And from all of this, I think we can all safely say that we are in a process that is teaching us or actually making us unlearn quite a lot. And it's certainly, for me, these lessons of humility and the ability to listen that I feel will certainly better equip me in the university classroom, and in debates on public history, both in Britain and in India in the future. So there's just little sort of potted reasons why we came together in the first place and our objectives. I'll now pass you over to Ranjani and Faisal, and will mute myself.
Thank you very much, Shalini, for that very intriguing introduction. I already have some questions, but now let's go with Ranjani and Faisal.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. I'm Ranjani, and I'm based right now out of Kotagiri, which is in Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, southern part of India. We work with an institution over here, a not-for-profit, and have had the chance over the last few years to experiment with ideas and methods, and we're happy to talk about some of that.
Yeah. So about 3 years back, we came here to set up the institutional archives for this foundation, Keystone Foundation. And they had been working in this landscape for like around, they've been here for about 30 years now. And they felt the need to sort of like disseminate the knowledge that they have sort of like documented, and they have been keeping with them for the last many years. And this idea led to sort of like thinking about setting up some sort of an information management system and archives of sorts at the institutional level. When we started working on this project, we realized that the organization has a rich amount of indigenous knowledge materials. A lot of their, a lot of the knowledge produced within the organization in participation with the communities here, they were sort of like, it contained a lot of the history, because like 30 years and this region has also had a huge social transformation which has taken place. A lot of market related changes have taken place, infrastructure has improved, so the landscape here has changed completely. Nilgiris, that is the district that we are placed in, that we are situated in, has got about 70% forest coverage, which is quite high in, like when you compare it to the rest of India. And also there are a high number of indigenous communities in this small region. It's about 5,000 square kilometers spread over like 3 states in southern India, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. And there are about like 12 indigenous communities within this landscape. A rich amount of indigenous knowledge systems. Even within the community itself, within micro regions, there will be differing ways of practicing their traditions and the kind of knowledge and the understandings they had about the landscapes, because of the obvious reason that they're all in different micro regions and they all adapted to different ecological niches. So we started realizing that to have an effective institutional archives project, we also needed to think about the communities, really think about whose knowledge it is, how the ownership over this knowledge can be sort of like negotiated with the communities became an important ethical consideration for us while setting up the institutional archives. The institution also felt that they owed a lot to the communities over here because they based all their work off the indigenous knowledge that they had sort of like worked with or collected over the years. They felt this need to give something back to the community. So they sort of like agreed that we have to work closely with the communities to set up the institutional archive. So from there, an idea for setting up community archiving initiatives sort of like came about. And this was a very interesting move on part of this organization because very few not-for-profit organizations in India, working for, let's say, like social change, have invested in an archival project at this scale. So this was a wonderful opportunity for us to sort of like work with the communities and understand how they want to represent their knowledge, how they can work with their knowledge, and aspects related to safeguarding their knowledge.
Yeah, I think also it becomes very important to get community participation and buy-in from the very word go in projects related to knowledge, ideas, etc. There is a very strong sense of history, and some of their historical timelines also span centuries, and there are continuing practices and ways of being. So for us, even coming together as possible ways of participatory archiving was very interesting and very diverse and dynamic through it all, because we were talking about forest species, we were talking about knowledge associated with very live changes, how they're adapting to the transformation also happening around them. Some of the methods, and I feel bad we're not going to be able to share the presentation. I guess we're not able to log into the computer, we're logging in through the phone. We'll try though. But is that there have been various methods possible to make community archives in participation of communities. For example, community media has seemed to be a very like we have a functional community radio operating out of this landscape where it travels 15 kilometers, but a lot of the indigenous community settlements contribute content, actively listen to their voices on the radio. There is an indigenous newsletter that has made it possible to also circulate information in a way that it started about 13 years ago. It was at a time that there wasn't that much phone networks, and so it made a lot of sense for the newspaper to be a way of communicating between different villages. But today, when there is so much internet and some amount of mobile accessibility, the newspaper still continues to be relevant because this becomes a source of self-expression, where communities come together to write about their histories. They push the boundaries a little more, from news to more feature articles and explorations of themselves. And the other very interesting method is the community fellowships model, which
Yeah, so all this work was informed through, the various discourses on indigenous human rights and, indigenous knowledge ownership issues, which a lot of communities outside India, that is in Australia and Northern America, and all, have been leading the way. They've been setting the standards, and we sort of like started plugging into these ideas, these larger ideas of knowledge ownership, and these ethical considerations also sort of like made it important for us to inform these communities about the materials that we have in our repositories. So the participatory exercises involved inviting community members to come and curate materials for us. Like we have a space here for communities to come and work in. And communities started visiting us at this drop-in center and helped us curate a lot of materials. And from here, again, further conversations about history and aspects related to how communities can speak about themselves. A very little mainstream media space is they never find themselves being represented in public spaces on the whole. So it became important for us to think about how communities can support their own initiatives. So it was also important for us to work with community-led researchers to inform the process and help us figure out how our materials can be handled. Like for instance, like whenever we have to have a participatory exercise where we think about how community knowledge can be imagined or spoken about, it requires a lot of effort in terms of bringing the communities together. Here, the communities are in very remote locations. So bringing them together and all involved a huge effort. So it made a lot of sense for our community-led researchers to be trained to think about how they can collect information about their own communities, because as an archiving project, or at least something that started as an archiving project, it became important to think about what history speaks about these communities also, and how communities interact with the histories which they have been, it has been used to treat these communities in a particular way. Communities have not been able to claim their, at least in this landscape, they have not been able to claim their entitlements like land-related rights, and also in terms of understanding their own histories or how they came to be in their current locations, our community-led researchers felt the need to go into their own histories. And this created this process where, like, large-scale community consultations are taken up on a regular basis. And
thereby overall adding to the entire process of building public histories, doing history together, finding a way to come together to set the terms of how even research on community histories happens. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we still have time, Shalini. Like, I guess we can also maybe open the floor to Aparna, Maya, and continue conversations through the hour on these ideas.
So shall I go? Okay. And hopefully your computer will start up so we can see the slides then. Okay, so these days I have started, whenever I speak about our project, I end up telling the audience about the questions that we have more than any definite answers, which is very different from the kind of history conference presentations I have done for most of my life. Yeah, where you work out some material, you have arrived at certain analyses, and that's what you present to the audience. But here, this is different. And this is what makes, I think, public history, what we are doing, different. So I thought I will speak about three things. First is the questions that I had when we embarked on the project. And then second, what changed? What new questions came up that I hadn't anticipated? Yeah, and I don't have good answers to them as yet. Yeah, so that's something all of us are still working through. And then some ideas about how the practice of public history is different from what I have been doing so far. So the differences I noted in the way, if I want to continue doing this, then here are a few things that I need to be mindful of as a historian. Yeah. Okay, so what were my questions as I participated in the creation of the project? Now, the main question for me was the question of how does a historian enter into a debate with individuals and groups in Indian society who have their own view of the past? Now, one of my historian friends keep reminding me, it's a regular knocking on my door to remind me that this is not of anyone's doing, but of postmodernism's. How postmodernism dismantled the truth claims of history as an epistemic framework, starting with Louis Mink, Hayden White and all. And now historians are like, we are navel gazers as best. So anyway, even though postmodernism did that to us, most historians decided that we didn't have to deal with it. We would still go ahead and write what we do. But yeah, so first was how historians can enter into debate with public. But I think my question was arising more from the political dispensation and the kind of things that we're seeing in the public sphere. Yeah, where WhatsApp University had taken over. So how do we actually engage with people? What's the mode of conversation? And also what one is seeing is growing anti-intellectualism in public sphere and in activist circles and even within academia. So there's a lot of trashing that goes on of, historians all the time in India, but of academia in general. And many times fairly so, but many times unfairly. And so how does one actually deal with that? And why that question is important is for a historian is how do we engage in a way to create a critical public sphere, not shut the conversation down, because often the the voice of authority sort of shuts down the conversation. Yeah. So that was one. And the second question that was for me very pertinent at the time was my own professional anxiety. Yeah, how does a historian engage with the limits of one's profession and the anxieties that come with those limits? So how do I actually engage with that? Because somewhere I was finding that the method we had or the way we were doing things wasn't enough. There was something that had to change, but what had to change, I wasn't very sure of. Yeah. So yeah, so those were the questions with which we created the project. Now, how did my questions change in the last 2 years? What came up for me? So I've listed out things, I'll just take you through that. So first was I keenly became, there was a growing and a keen awareness of the context in which we were working, which was not simply about the political dispensation, but there was a lot more that was going on. Yeah. And in that lot more, there was, foremost was digital auto-ethnography. Yeah, now one can auto-publish and auto-generate one's representation on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp. So this intermediary, we were like the church, yeah? Like in the Reformation, we were like the pastors and priests who were being thrown out. So people could reach God on their own. So yeah, so people can, digital ethnography, auto-ethnography had opened up that door where people could auto-publish and you weren't needed. Second was transmediation. That is, content was migrating seamlessly from one platform to the other, almost seamlessly from one platform to the other. So the question, this made the question of form important. Like we historians, we write. We are, the form in which we narrate is writing, but our content is not always easily migrating. But there was all this content in the public sphere that was migrating very quickly. Yeah. Now, third was rights-based writing driven by identity politics. Yeah, so now we have Dalit historiography, Dalit researchers out there, yeah, and who are calling out Savarna scholars or upper caste scholars, researchers who are working on, Dalit lives. They are being called out now. So there is that rise of rights-based, identity-driven, intellectual life, which has come of age. It's very much asserting itself. So no longer can you just get away with, writing about, marginalized folks or historically oppressed communities without sort of explaining your location, yeah, or being aware, at least being self-reflexive about it. And the last element, another element of the context was polyvocality. So the context, there were far too many voices, and in a good way, because often when we write, we tend to impose monochromatic or a monologue. It's a historian's monologue. Yeah, we write as omniscient narrators, but I felt that somewhere that wasn't holding up to scrutiny. There were all these voices that were required us to accommodate them, but how do we? Because our method was not really up to it. Yeah. So that was one, that the context was shifting. So in that, what meaning, what impact does that have for your craft? The changing context in which you write. Then associated with this was the question of location. So as I was saying, that you know, at one level, I understand that there's a lot of anti-intellectualism, but at the same time, what about the academic intermediary in the age of digital autoethnography? Is the scholar really required? Am I really required? Yeah, is the scholar required to catalyze the process? And or is my job to serve as an arbiter between competing truth claims? Yeah, and do I really have the authority to validate a particular narrative or not? Because that's the agenda that a historian many times had assigned themselves in past. But can I really do that? Is that an authentic way of practicing my craft? Then related to the question of the academic intermediary is also my own personal location. Yeah. So like often I've stopped and asked myself, what is my need to do this kind of a project? Why public history? And here I just want to pause, while Shalini did say it, I just want to sort of foreground this, that often public history is understood as historians participating in the public sphere. But when we designed this project, it was really about how can we have work with communities? Like how can we bring them into the process of analysis instead of us analyzing and presenting our findings to people? Yeah, and often this sort of triggered the questions of the intermediary, that I'm still working as an intermediary. What about me? Why am I here? And why am I invested in this idea that everyone should get to write their history? Am I trying to reinvent myself as a knowledge producer? Yeah, and and the answers were, there are no answers. Basically, what you need is a lot of self-reflexivity and deep vulnerability to go through dislodging the hierarchies that were actually empowering or upholding my way of knowing the world. Yeah, and when that gets dismantled, what does that do for me as a person? Yeah, and that so sort of the question turned back on me to ask myself, okay, if this is there, then what am I doing with myself? Then the next question was about, who is this for? Who are we doing this for? And often when we are talking, at least this has come up a lot when Maya and I talk, and she says, hey, this is the pass the mic moment. So I'm like, yeah, this is the pass the mic moment where you hand over the mic to someone else to speak because you've spoken enough. Yeah. So, but then it sort of, then I end up asking myself, is this a reparations mode of researching? Yeah, it's like the Queen, all of us wanting the Queen to apologize for Jallianwala Bagh. So is this what, is this the sort of apology moment, reparations moment of history writing? So, I think, yeah. So, and I also realized that we may not be able to access the subaltern's notions of the past, and what we arrive at may not be even relevant to the communities. And I'll give you one example in the end with one image that, you could be completely off on a tangent. Subaltern studies could write all about Chandra's death, but that didn't, like I'm talking about Ranajit Guha's famous article on Chandra's death, but that didn't bring Chandra back to life, or it did nothing for Chandra's community. And that's the question we're asking: who does this knowledge benefit? Who is it for? So, instead, we may need to shift our thinking to asking how historical notions or structures frame their present. So instead of leaving the inquiry into the past of subaltern communities, but instead of leaving it there, bring it up to the present and ask, how does this frame their present? So it has to be a more presentist inquiry than just simply be a question you're resolving about the past. Yeah. Then came up often another question that came up was, who has the power to narrate? Who should be narrating? Because the power to narrate is the power the power to narrate is itself a manifestation of power, being able to narrate. Yeah. So and in one sense, everyone has the right to narrate. But then the question is, in situation of narrative abundance, which authorial voice do we privilege and which voice gets archived? Yeah. And will only the narratives that come bound by ethics of disciplinary sanctioned method acquire academic legitimacy, or everything goes? Yeah. So which narratives would be recognized as capital H, as history with capital H, or the others would be just narratives? Yeah. So again, there is very little conversation within the discipline about this. What goes? Yeah, and does the discipline, and when we are questioning the discipline's method, does that very method that is a question now being questioned have the authority to provide academic legitimacy? Okay, now, but okay, I'm circling back to the question of what happens, what does a historian do in a situation where everything does go, where anything goes? Yeah, because these days in India, everything goes. Yeah, there is no fact check. There is utter distortion. The courts feel that they can adjudicate the past. Just today, there was a ruling where somebody said that in the situation of historical events associated with historical conflicts, the courts can adjudicate. So the courts have taken over my job. Yeah. So in that situation, what does a historian do? Because here on one side, I'm dismantling the hierarchies within my discipline. At another level, this very dismantling is actually paving more and more way for distorted versions of history to come in. Yeah. So, so I'm like, what's the question for me here then? What's the question I need to be raising? And maybe the historian will raise the question about this phenomenon. What does this phenomenon say about this moment in history? Yeah. So, and maybe we need to examine the meaning it holds for people. Why are they willing to go along with certain versions of the past, yeah, in this moment, which they weren't for a few years back in India? So, and I feel over here, I respond to this thing of anything goes with, and I know this question is not something historians ever ask themselves. I think there was this one article in this journal, History and Theory. I forget the author's name, maybe it was Peter Novick or someone who ran through all the articles post Second World War to see when do historians return to the moral question. Yeah, and historians don't return to the moral question. It is a question left to the philosophers or at best anthropologists. Yeah, historians don't address that question. But here, in order to respond to the anything goes, I return to the question of what is historians' moral burden? Yeah, in a situation like the way we are faced today. So, and there the burden is to make other ways of knowing available for people. We can amplify. Yeah, and actually question the narratives that come from a place of hate and anti-intellectualism. I think that ground I wouldn't want to abdicate as a historian. Yeah, and yeah, and the last question that came up in some of the talks, some of the conversations we've had are what will be the site of knowledge production? And will it still continue to be the university? And I think that's gotten challenged for us, that the sites of research are not fixed. And they're also, and the people who participate in this, it's research is also taken forward. What impels research is aspirations. Yeah, so the researchers, and those have to be recognized. People's aspirations of why they write histories or why they even want to participate in this dialogue, those have to be accommodated and recognized. You can't set them aside. Yeah. So yeah, now very quickly in 2 minutes, I'll just talk about some insights I have into doing public history as a method. Yeah, not just as something not as just practice, but as a method. So now I feel that when we are engaged in the idea of public history, what we are working with is a very different notion of time. Yeah, here the past hasn't ceased in that way, where the past is like a smoking gun, it's still an unfinished business, it's analogous and it's messy. And I don't think there is enough conversation in the field of history about the messiness of this. Yeah, and maybe if you can have those kinds of conversations, what do we do with the past doesn't appear like a neatly packaged box with a nice red ribbon on top of it, where it's still messy. Yeah, so there's a different notion of time here. And second is changing and expanding the idea of archives. I think that's why we connect with Ranjani and Faisal, that a new conception of the archive underwrites this effort. And so public history does need to take into account the public whose past is being represented, and they have to be made stakeholders in the process of representation. Yeah, and therefore the importance of community archives, community media. And what may end up getting generated is a highly context-based experiential knowledge, from which you may find it difficult to extrapolate and come up with meta narratives or grand narratives or meta frameworks. That may happen, but so be it, because it'll be relevant to its context. So knowledge produced would be relevant to its context. Then at the level of methods, in terms of what does historian do? Because it's not simply about going and looking into a paper archive. So historian has to engage with the ethnographic method. We need to give it its due, learn it, teach it to our grad students, oral history methods, psychoanalysis, methods generated by contemporary history. So all these methods, I think, go into making into the craft of, practice of public history. Then dialogue as a method. Yeah, and here we might just start focusing on the process, yeah, than on the end product, because the process is where everything is. So this is really flipping the way we have been doing history so far, because the process was somehow in the background, and what we presented as our monographs were the books, were the sort of our outcome, the finished product were our monographs. So the process was always hidden, but in case of public history, it's the process that you need to visibilize. Yeah, and also you can no longer lionize the written form. The form has to shift. It can be written, but writing would be one of the things. So history communication in variety of forms. It could be weaving, the shawls that are woven, or the food that's eaten, having a food festival, or what have you. It could be anything. So history communication becomes very important along with history, right? Like doing the public history is a lot about history communication, and it's multilingual practice. Yeah, I think some of us have been in a room where 3 or 4 languages were being spoken at the same time, and translation was happening in 3 languages. Yeah, and it was fun to watch and observe. And yeah, so it's multilingual. And finally, what I had to contribute was that the role of the historian, this fundamentally changes the role of the historian. A public historian can't be the same as, it changes because you enter this through multiple subject positions. You're not the omniscient narrator at all times. Yeah, you have to learn to collaborate. Historians don't collaborate. Yeah, most of us don't. The only time we collaborate is when we're doing a seminar and taking out an edited volume from that seminar. But collaborative research is rare in history discipline of history. So you have to learn to collaborate. Sometimes you become a facilitator. Sometimes you're playing the translator, and sometimes an expert. But you're also entering as a member of the public. Like it's not about being a scholar and being within the ivory tower, and then there is public outside the ivory tower. But you enter the conversation as a member of the public. And therefore, the questions in the public sphere become very important for the historians. But many of us historians tend to set aside many of the contemporary public sphere's questions and say, hey, I'm a historian, I don't need to look at that. But a public historian is one who engages with the questions that are there in the public sphere. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to show you a photo before I stop. Yeah, and we took due consent from the person whose photo is. I'll tell you about him in a minute. Okay. I hope all of you can see it. Like there is no photo at the moment. Yeah. Okay. So this young man is Montesh. Yeah. Montesh is one of the community researchers we are working with, and he belongs to the Toda community. Now, I'll quickly give you a context for this photograph. The reason I took it was that we had trekked up, others had trekked for only half an hour. It took me 2 hours to get up the hill. Yeah. And I thought I was going to die by the time I got up the hill. And we had gone up to to be part of this special ceremony that Montesh's village folks have every year, which is related to the buffaloes in the community. Yeah. So the ceremony is one of those really traditional ceremonies where they're wearing traditional clothes, and this thing is happening on top of the hill. And the moment the ceremony finishes, Suddenly, this Honda scooter appears from somewhere on top of the hill, and Montesh gets on it and drives off to the village, where another portion of the ceremony takes place. And so for me, it was like we are up on this hill. I mean, like to get on top of the hill, it's so difficult, and then you see a scooter there. And Montesh then taking off with the scooter. And I'm like, okay. This suddenly I saw two time frameworks, two like modernity, tradition, or whatever, colliding into one frame, and here is the photograph. Yeah. So this is the way I'm reading it. Yeah. But when this photo was shown back to Montesh, I'll just show you what he had to say about it. So I sent it to Ranjani to ask Montesh, what does he have to say about the photo? If he writes his history, which is the part of this project, what does he have to say about himself? And he said what I guessed he would say. He said, no, I don't want to say anything. But the designs made by my mom in that t-shirt, now only seeing closely. So this photo helps me to see the beauty of my shirt. That's it. Yeah. So you can see how historians gaze, like an anthropologist, one can be highly problematic. So I'll stop share here. And as you can see, all his clothes, they've been embroidered by his wife and his mother. And you wear them on that day, on that ceremony. So only these two female relatives can do that for you. So yeah. So that's what's more important to him. And for me, it's a scooter. Okay, I'll stop here. I think Maya can go.
Thanks, Aparna, for passing the microphone. Yeah. I think, yeah, I sort of rightfully pick up from where you left off, which is we find ourselves in this quandary in this particular moment, and we're well aware of the reality of our times and the ubiquity of the digital. So, I sort of locate my question about the digital and community archives in terms of this moment. And also, what does it mean for pedagogy, participatory learning, and archiving? So I'm just going to try to share my screen. Yeah, I think you get this. Okay. Actually, if you don't mind, I will not be full screen because I'm sharing, a few things which, yeah, makes it easier if I have this open. Okay. Yeah, so you can see that. Okay. Whether through crowdsourced projects or a new creation of data, public culture, the larger public is implicit in the activation of new possibilities for multilingual and public histories. Without overstating the power of the digital for public history, we need to reckon with our times. To understand that India is the youngest country in the world now and poised at becoming the world's largest by next year, is to truly wonder at what the digital means for this population. What is archivally salient for this population? What is to be made of the endangered living cultures of many? And how is curation or ownership to be determined? So my sort of bit takes off on the first word in our project, which is the ownership of public history in India. And clearly we solicit and seek multiple participations from many publics. But in the meantime, I think there are certain operational issues also that need to be thought about. And through a few examples I'm running you through, I hope to kind of detail what they might look like. New forms of archiving are also unleashing new audiences in the digital. And I will briefly walk us through some efforts. And what does this really mean for engagement in the digital? Okay, so to start with, let's just assume that the digital is a story about the needs of an audience. So in one sense, obviously the state also imagines an audience, and the state has decided that there is, some sort of need that is being met. And there have been amazing sort of digitization projects, right? So when you look at sort of the Films Division of India, other government agencies, there have been the creation of digital archives for the nation because citizens should have these things. In cultural terms, the computational tradition goes back to two huge projects. One is the Vichitra project, which is a varorium of Tagore's works, and the other is Project Madurai. Now, what is really striking, actually, and this is just, people can sort of look at this later also, is the fact that it's been 10 years following Vichitra, and you would think it had unleashed a whole moment of great people of India projects which should follow, but actually fewer than you would expect projects exist like that. And I'm sort of locating that problem in the question of patronage, which is to say that there really is a massive absence of an ecosystem of patronage, which I'll get to in a minute. Like maybe it's not a bad thing, but in any case, we have other state efforts like the Digital Library of India at IIT Kharagpur, and the National Archives have, some portion of their collections been digitized. But the fact is that in India, we don't have an ecosystem of big state grants. So there is no National Endowment for the Humanities, or our project has benefited from the British Academy. But the fact is that had India sort of this ecosystem of funding, maybe we would have sort of sought for that elsewhere. In any case, an Australian project like the Trove project, for instance, which leverages crowd participation, would assume that kind of scale, and we don't have that kind of scale. And in the meantime, since we don't have this one nation, one grant, one archive sort of thing, we don't have another problem, which is the focus on print. And I say this because in some senses, the sources of digital public history are dealing with such a varied variety of materials, from orality to film to social media, that it sort of almost is a good thing to be able to process those other materials in the meantime. So that being said, I'm going to move to the next set of examples, which are basically just a list of some other sort of public historical interventions. And in some cases, like if you look at that of Zuban, or in the case of even Pari, you see what was an analog effort, meaning publishers or journalists rightfully claiming digital space. And in many instances, they're sort of also they're digitizing their collections that were material in this case. In the case of Pari, something fascinating happens, and I'm just going to now switch that thing. I hope you can see it. Right, this is one of the projects. Pari stands for the People's Archive of Rural India, started by P. Sainath, the famous journalist in India, works on rural issues. And what this site does is it returns public history to the realm of audio and song. Please walk through these sites, when you can, do visit them. But I sort of just wanted to mention them because I think they're offering us a way to think through something I want to talk about. Another site like Oral History Narmada also is documenting, in public historical terms, non-mainstream voices. And this makes me lets me make 2 points about digital public history, which is, of course, it goes much beyond the university. And exciting interventions are being undertaken by a very diverse set of practitioners. This is, I think, you can see it. This is by Nandini Oza, and I'm sure, there are credits in the site. But also, this constitutes a very unique sort of intervention in the access to knowledge movement. And this, I think, brings me now to thinking about how these resources challenge the way in which we teach, learn, and deploy primary sources. So I'm just, because actually Ranjani, Faisal, you couldn't share, I just thought I'll pull up this page, which details now 2 initiatives in Keystone. And I think what this is doing for us also sort of making us rethink our own primary sources and what we can turn to in terms of, materials. So in this case now, this here we go. Sorry. Yeah, Radio Kottagiri has been operational since 2013. I think you can see it here. Yeah. And it has a 15-kilometer range, which used to reach about 1,000 families. Now, the thing is that this Radio Kottagiri also has a Facebook page. And that changes, in some sense, the ephemerality of a radio show, right? Where you can revisit, or there's a talkback feature, right, in Facebook typically. So in that sense, there is something that I think amps up an effort in digital terms, which is amazing for the way in which we hear these voices. Unsurprisingly, of course, it's multilingual, as is the newspaper. Where are we? Here. Yeah. So the newspaper also, and this sort of got me thinking when we visited actually, Ranjani, Faisal, which is that since it uses different languages, it can actually so greatly benefit from the feature that you nowadays see in digital, which is that read this aloud to me. And it can be multi-channel in terms of different audio options. So this sort of makes me realize that it's kind of turbocharging extent efforts in terms of indigenous journalistic practices already there at Keystone. And for that reason, I think these are all examples really of the digital serving the local. The book that we came up with in, I forgot, sorry, 2020, I think, really kind of was looking at the initial story of the digital in India, which was this way in which, big institutions and sectors were taking on digital platforms. And that was the story, right? And so especially, once whatever COVID happened, many other stories came in, but that was the story. And today, I think this digital public history story is about the deployment of the digital in very local ways. So instead of just looking at digitization, there is something about the fact that these new digital spaces are serving their publics, not just the world at large. So there's a turn away from I'm talking to the world to I'm talking to my neighbor. And I think COVID especially really brought that to the fore. So in that sense, sort of the focus I think has to look now much more at the local than we used to do. And so I bring up for that reason examples, right, where we need to think through, I think, challenges when we are also passing the microphone and encouraging more local production. Aparna showed you an image of Montish, and I was hoping we could see more of his work, but we will, I hope later or something. One is, of course, the amazing film work that he's done, and the second is something which he's done with cultural mapping. Now, the thing is that Montish's renaming of Toda names on Google Maps may not change, or Google Earth, sorry, may not change the way Google Maps represents the renaming. But the fact is, it is empowering at a local level of narration. And the fact is that digital capture can include self-narrated forms, right? Without the need for literacies, which is sort of mind-blowing when you think about multilingual India. And in the case of the Nilgiris, I was told also that none of the tribal languages ever had scripts to begin with. So the link language at this point was Tamil. But is there a way to sort of rethink the digital as the oral such that you're not going through text and print and such, right, as that? So if you're looking at that as a sort of future moment, then issues of copyright and ownership and data protection are really at the forefront of guarding subaltern voices in the digital and really being aware of threats of co-optation or unauthorized capture. So I raise these three questions and I see them as needs actually with regards to how this might be prevented. One is that since we don't frankly have a research ethical framework issued locally in India, there needs to be a sort of way that, we script in some sense the collection of oral public history in a framework that, is suitable to India. The second is, if Ranjani, Faisal, if you get connection and you can show the way you've used Rukutu, that if we're using sort of a multilingual and a multi-authored database, right, where you're uploading digital information, but you're also sort of thinking about sliding access, you're not guaranteeing everybody universal access, etc., for culturally sensitive reasons. How do we make that interoperable? And I mean this because not just mine, but I think a lot of our imagining of future public history in India is that it is deeply local, but we want to sort of multiply that local. So there is a sense of, being able to see what others are sort of producing and how they're imagining their local also. And for that, how do we tell these stories? Do we create a common platform to hang these stories such that they can be included in any lesson plans or other people's need for, multiplying primary sources? If so, what is the funding ecosystem that we imagine for such work? I'm part, along with many of us here, of the Milli Collective, and we also imagine a digitally inclusive future and also sort of much deeper engagement with public history in an ethical fashion. So, in a university classroom, storytelling often is happening now through timelines and maps and such. But the fact is that I hope that the goal for the ownership of public history is to not just do that, but to amplify the local and to use the digital to deepen our collective engagement. So I hope that this was useful and I'm done. Thank you. Oh, wait, sorry. This is the last slide. Yeah. And this is because we do have a Twitter handle. It's called History Publics. And we would like to showcase a lot more work in the fields of public history in India. So please tweet us, we will tweet you and all of that. Thank you. Yeah.
So Jimena, I'll pass it over to you. As you can see, we don't have the answers. We're just really good at generating more and more and more and yet more questions. But hopefully those questions are useful to the enterprise of public history in India.
Well, first of all, thank you for those presentations. They were really engaging, and precisely I think that the beauty of this presentation is that there is no answers. I think that Aparna put it very beautifully, saying that a historian has to be part of the public, and the public needs to ask questions. So I think this is very interesting. Before I ask some questions, I would like to open for the audience. If you have any questions, sometimes it's easier for you to write them in the chat and I will read them. Or if you want to open your mic to ask questions to any of the TOPHI members, that would be okay. Well, while people get some courage to ask you, I would like to ask a very basic question, but thinking of the public that's going to see this recording, can you and also because I have a background as an anthropologist, but I was trained like in a very conventional way, if you want. So I would like to any of you to expand a little bit about autoethnography. What is that, and how are you using it in your research for public history? And then we will have a question of Anisha Saxena. So any of you could answer that question of autoethnography.
Well, I'll start, and
Okay.
I'm sure some of the team will correct me. But what we decided at the very beginning, as I said before, was that we would have a document to record and collate our experiences of the process, sort of going through the project, so that, and actually it's quite a huge, even though none of us have been very regular in actually contributing to it. We did have these aspirations of every week or every 2 weeks, but we have not been doing that, certainly. But occasionally we do write in, and we express problems, we articulate our sort of our current state of mind in terms of those questions that Aparna was asking about, what am I doing here, what's my sort of place within this, and actually what we envisage is to collate those reflections in such a way as to produce a publication on that, about the process of the project, through and for that to be a co-authored piece that we all put together. So that's really, it's a very basic understanding of autoethnography, but I think it would be useful. I think it'd be useful for future researchers who who can learn from our mistakes, frankly, as well.
Thank you, Shalini. Any of the other members of the team would like to add something? Well, Anisha, you have the floor. You can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I just want to thank everyone for putting this together, and honestly, at a time where I could attend from East Coast, because most of the times I'm not able to attend and I feel really bad about it. This was really good, and the work that all of you are doing so important, and I'm sure you realize that, and I hope your students realize that. While my question really comes out of from what Aparna said, but I think any of you can answer it, and I'm all of you have expressed your frustrations with what is going on, and I'm frustrated too and looking for answers and asking questions. And I was really intrigued when Aparna said that why historians haven't asked moral questions. And do you think it's because the institutions that historians created were built around these obsessions related to objective primary sources that we all are highly, taught to be obsessive about, and this idea of being subjective about your work was really looked down upon? Is the reason that we just didn't learn how to ask moral questions, which should be really a part of our job?
Should I go for it? Just one, because thank you for the question, Anisha. It's a question I've been asking myself for quite some time now. But so two quick things, just two quick thoughts, and this is not by way of answering, but really engaging with you on this, because it's something I've been thinking about also. That to do an ethics workshop, I actually had to invite one of my anthropologist colleagues to talk to my grad students. And I was like, I should have been able to do this, but this is not a question I've ever been, I've ever engaged with. But so first, like a lot of like Advait Saeed's writing and a lot of these, those are driven by a moral question. Yeah, so we may not acknowledge that in our writing, but a lot like E.P. Thompson's work on the working class. So these are deeply moral questions that they're driven by. Yeah. And so that impulse is very much there. But it is not something we are confronting head on as anthropologists do, because there is an assumption that our subjects are dead. Yeah. Or that the way historians practice deals with the time that is over. Yeah. So past is no longer a smoking gun. So the ethics of that thing is not something we have to deal with, or it's not something we have to account for. I think that's one thing, that a certain notion of past is there. Second, many historians have been impelled by their moral ways of looking at their morality to write a certain way. And third, you might find Priya Satya's recent book called Time's Monster. It's an excellent book in the way it forefronts the question of morality. And what she's saying is that it's not that the historian is not asking moral questions. History in itself has become the moral explanatory framework for the modern world. History has displaced the divine explanation. So instead of saying God did it, people say, oh, this was done in history, so I can do it. So history in itself has become a moral framework. Yeah. So historians, when they're writing, we already presume morality instead of questioning and asking questions about it. So, I think that's the thing. And it's now coming back to bite us in some ways. Not asking those questions, not engaging with those questions, not engaging with the question of language. I think like we all write in English, and everything written in vernacular becomes a primary source for us instead of being another secondary literature that we engage with. So yeah, I think those are the things with our discipline. But Shalini, Maya, Ranjani, Faisal, please. Again, I keep coming to this as a historian, but how do you guys?
Disciplines are about power, right? Academic disciplines have always been structured by that. So what is remarkable, I think, to us is that, of course, you kind of have to leave the university to do public history and then ask those moral questions and those questions, because the classroom somehow has not been that space, it should have been, but yeah.
But we can make it. I'm just saying the power still lies with us in terms of converting our classrooms into those spaces.
And also reimagining the classroom, right? Redefining what is a classroom. It doesn't have to be the paying student in that space. So I think that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I have another question related to that one that Anisha asked, and also related with Aparna and Maya were talking about, because after your presentations, I have the sense that this project is highly interdisciplinary. which public history might be. And you talked about psychoanalysis. You mentioned psychoanalysis. So could you give me like some hint or tell me more about how are you using psychoanalysis, like with ethnography and all the other things you mentioned? Just briefly.
Maya, you want to go? Ranjani, you want to answer that? I'm laughing because, you know, we're not really. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I'm not sure. This is not from a psychoanalysis framework that I'm going to respond to this. But while setting up the archives here, we realized that there is a lot of trauma involved in this exercise. Like we have to deal with community trauma. There are these memories like mistrust, and even like a lot of the questions which have come up here, like primary sources. We also, as these outsiders who are trying to work on community archives, in a way, we are tormentors, you know, like we ask our community fellows about evidence. We ask them about questions related to their ownership over the landscape, over their own knowledge resources, over their own natural resources, and we provoke them to, you know, maybe work on trying to record or find some non-primary sources of information which is not based on, let's say, like an objective truth or something at that level. So it's a very traumatic process. So in a way, when we work on this idea of history, we have to deal with a lot of the outcomes of this process, like the trust that the community builds with us. So essentially, we have to be very sensitive to their specific needs when they start relating with people who've come to study them, people who treat them as sites of research. It becomes a very tricky area for us to work on, and I don't know. This is not anything related to psychoanalysis or psychology or something to that effect, or even related to what history actually is, whether history is a science or whether history is based on scientific methods, or whether history has come far enough to absorb the inconsistencies of the oral narrative. Even like when we're talking about autoethnographies, one thing that has sort of like come out of our association with this project is in a small way, we work in a region called Nilambur, which is in Kerala, and it's part of the Nilgiris Biosphere Reserve. So culturally, there are connections between where we are right now in Kotagiri and Nilambur. Like the communities are interrelated and things like that. They work on trying to write about their experiences on the field. And this brings out quite a few, insights into how they are trying to process the kind of interventions that we are making. Interventions is not a fair word, and maybe it's not even fair for the communities, but it is sometimes important to think about ways to bring their stories and give it a platform to sort of respond to and counter these representations which have been created about them by us, maybe not us, but ethnographers or people who are coming to do a kind of research and understand what these communities are about. So that kind of an imposition which happens on their, representation, which also kind of in a way coaxes them to perform their identity. It's very interesting that Aparna showed that picture of Montesh on a scooter, but that is in his own village. But even when they come out to participate in events, let's say like in our campus, on our Keystone campus, there is this, there is this sort of pressure to perform their identity. And because of all these complicated situations that we deal with on the ground, it becomes important to kind of like acknowledge that this kind of work has to be very sensitive, and it has to form support networks for these communities also. We as outsiders might have to sometimes legitimize or validate certain claims that they make, like in terms of tenurial rights or claiming the landscape or saying that we were here before the others. It brings up these tricky questions because this very kind of identity politics is being used in such like perverted ways these days. So we are in this place where like we have to make the community speak about their identities, but at the same time make it slightly, we have to be able to draw the boundaries between what it does to the communities in terms of pushing them into certain pigeonholes also. I think I'm rambling here a little bit, but
No,
some thoughts that came to my mind. Yeah.
very, very important thoughts, I'd say. Go, Aparna.
Okay, so just to add to what Faisal was saying, so when you're dealing with experience and testimony, I think I use the word psychoanalysis in that context. That a lot of the writing on experience and testimony have come out of collaborations between oral historians, psychoanalysts, and historians. So the people I had in mind were Dory Lobb and Shoshana Feldman. The work they have done on called Crisis of Testimony. So in that, they talk about how a psychoanalyst and a historian are collaborating, and this psychoanalyst is taking a testimony to a historians conference. Yeah, and there, this one woman says that in the Auschwitz camp, suddenly the 4 chimneys burst, and it seemed that we were going to be liberated from the camp. Now, what is the historian's response? They will go back and do fact check. And when they do fact check, they find out only 1 chimney burst. So they say, this testimony cannot be used. It's false. Yeah. But the point the psychoanalysts were making was it's irrelevant whether 4 chimneys burst or 1 chimney burst. The fact that she remembered that 4 chimneys burst, the fact that she remembers it as such says the extent of the feeling she had about it. That's the magnitude is not about the chimney, but her feelings. And that's what needs to be pulled out of the testimony. So there, the historian's method falls short of capturing what the testimony holds for history. So I think in that context, when you're doing testimony, the kind of work Faisal and Ranjani do there, I think, and dealing with trauma, I think trauma, experience, and testimony, they require help from psychoanalysis.
Thank you. Oh, Maya.
Yeah, I just also realized, that the creation of films and such, right, by Montish, there's a form of memory making which is not for public consumption, and there's a form which is knowingly evidence. So much digital is performative because it's permanently out there in the public record, right? Which is where the self-awareness of being performed, also sort of, folds into it. And also because, like we know, often digital capture can never be taken back, right? Once it's there, it's out there. So I think what Faisal was saying about particularly land claims and, the way in which these articulations are often also in legal terms important, distinguishes between what memory is for, a larger public versus what is a private collective memory. So, and that I think is also linked to the trauma of being misunderstood, which is important in this regard.
Thank you, Maja. We still have time for one short question if anybody is interested. If nobody is, I have another question. I am very interested in the practice you as a team do as community with community archives. So this is just a very basic question. So how do you gather the material? You have interviews, oral histories, you do field work, you take pictures, but then how do you process that? You put it in a digital platform, as Maya was saying, and how do you socialize that with the community? Like in the more practical aspect of the archives.
Yeah, actually, too bad. We wanted to talk more about it through also some of the slides, but I think how this happens is we are at a time that rapidly each person is creating a lot of data on their mobile phones, on through they're constantly listening to audios, creating new audios, reels. So I think there is automatically a huge amount of data generation across communities that's happening. That apart, because of their like I think the mobile itself becomes a great way to bridge literacy gap, age gap, many kinds of technological gaps, because the phone seems like a very accessible tech. We tend to direct a lot of storytelling through that, a lot of filmmaking that happens through just the mobile phone. And yes, we're also putting it all together in two repositories, actually. One, which is the institutional repository. And in fact, the institutional repository itself is like very, very dense. So it's sort of meant for more internal use and use for researchers, other kinds of publics who are in the development sector. But the community archives are on a completely different system, which has a little more of a decentralized tech wireframe. And for both of these systems, like the contributors, the users are different, but the systems do talk to each other, because there's a lot of, like Faisal was also mentioning earlier, there's a lot of indigenous knowledge content in the institutional archives. And there's a way that both systems talk to each other. But yes, like we run on very simple tech, like we want to support open source through and through. We want to be able to share the tools that we use with communities that we work with. So it's like you have.
We also try to work with the communities, and that the communities understand the tools that can be used to store information as a repository. So that includes communities being able to access these technologies easily. We have a community media network close by from where we are located right now in Kotagiri. And that runs on a Raspberry Pi machine, which is a single board computer and doesn't require too many resources to run. Communities can keep this afloat very easily. And this Raspberry Pi system also supports a Wi-Fi radio sort of a community media network sort of a setup. It's a quasi radio. It's based on a Wi-Fi network, but we have community-based researchers collecting traditional stories and turning that into consumable programs. When we, yeah.
Which the elders are listening to, like they all sit together, listen to their own songs and stories.
It happens in a very participatory mode where the recordings are made, and we sort of like train them to package these programs in a nice way, whether they're traditional songs, stories, questions around it, and it's sort of like accessible for the community through the Wi-Fi media network. And for people who do not have smart devices, there is a high density of smart devices, even if there might be no internet connectivity in that village. People still do have smartphones, especially the younger crowd. Older people also have it, so it's easy for them to access this content. And this sort of like creates the idea of a community archive of sorts. And it's very easily accessible technology. And on the campus also, we provide, for our community research fellows to try out new software. Like, I think Maya was mentioning this earlier, like Mukurtu is one of the content management systems that we use. And it's a completely indigenous community developed software, a content management system, which sort of like respects a lot of the community knowledge protocols and aspects related to community knowledge safeguarding. So these ideas are easily deployable, and we allow our community fellows to learn and perhaps take it back and try it out in their villages, perhaps at some point. So these are some of the ways we try to create this ecosystem.
Thank you, Ranjani, Faisal. We are out of time, but I would like to ask you if any of the members of the team has any final remarks or want to close in some way.
I just wanted to say, as Maya ended with, it would be really great to hear from other, projects like this, other public history practitioners, archivists, and for you to tweet us and for us to share this and continue this conversation as well.
Thank you, Shalini. If there are no more final remarks, I just want to thank you. This was an amazing presentation. It was really, really interesting. I'm sure all the explorers and the International Federation for Public History are going to be very happy with the recording of the video, because it's going to be uploaded in the YouTube channel and in the Vimeo channel. I just want to tell you again, thank you, and also let the people know that Explorers is taking a break until September. August, we're not going to have any events, and in September we'll be back. If any of you has ideas for an event, get in touch with me and we can make an event happen. And I hope this is just the beginning of a very fun ongoing conversation. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.